Small businesses are at the heart of the U.S. economy. Here at Nurture Small Business Podcast, we're dedicated to seeing our small business owners succeed. I am your host, Denise Cagan, president of DCA Virtual Business Support. If you like what you hear on today's podcast, please share it. You have my gratitude for doing so. Today's guest has a passion about humanizing the work in the human performance field. If you have employees, you know that people are both the source of some of the risks and an integral part of identifying and managing all risk. Welcome to our show, Angie Dianetti, president and visionary of Radcom.
Glad to be here. Very excited.
Absolutely. I am thrilled to have this conversation with you. I know in your bio, I read how passionate you are about building the leadership and performance culture. But before we get into that a little bit, tell me just a little bit about Radcom and its history.
Sure. We started almost 27 years ago, and we started as a technical documentation and consulting firm. And every time I've been through, as you know, over 27 years, lots of ups and downs in the economy. So in order to stay relevant to the industry and to have that longevity, we reinvent ourselves every time there's a dip. So we added to the documentation, we added training and e-learning development, and we switched industries. We kept looking at where we could hit the needs best. And recently we had this big aha is, why do people need documentation and training? And the reason they need it is to improve the performance of their employees. And we also found that often documentation and training is the go-to solution for performance problems, but it doesn't always actually solve the problems. And we wanted to dig deeper and help people actually solve those problems.
So I have got so many questions for you. So I first want to ask you about this evolution of the company. Like, how hard is it to reinvent yourself multiple times in this 27-year history? What do you need to consider to, like, it's not a small change. You're changing your industry, you just said.
Well, and we changed the industry, our target market industry. We started off very much .com bubble hadn't burst. So we were writing user documentation for software, help files, all kinds of things like that. Well, now all those software companies that had all that venture capital are gone. Mm-hmm. What do you do? And so we went into manufacturing because standard operating procedures, user manuals, things like that. So we took our skill set that we had and we looked and say, who else needs this skill set? Then manufacturing gets offshored. And so we're like, okay, what other industries can use the skill sets that we have? And banking and insurance all needs this stuff. Tech writing starts to get a little bit more commoditized, and some of that work starts getting offshored to India and China and Eastern Europe. And we're like, okay, what other things are related to tech writing that our people have the skills to do? And developing training materials and instructional design. And we started to build capacity in e-learning development. So it's finding adjacent things that already use what you do so that you can leverage it into a new area.
Do you know what I love about what you just said? You did not use the word pivot once. For some reason, that word just annoys me, because we don't pivot as much as people think we do. We adjust sales. And if you're a smart business owner, you are continually adjusting the sales. And you did just that.
It's really a matter of paying attention to what's going on in the world and adjusting to fit so that you stay relevant.
I love it. Just absolutely love it. Okay, so now we're going to dive into what you are doing now. you said that the problem isn't specifically the training or the procedures, that it's usually something else. What are some of the things that you find?
So there's really two levels in performance. There's the company level things, and then there's the individual level things. So at the company level, are we setting expectations? And are we providing feedback real time? Not annual reviews, not even, we're an EOS company, not even quarterly conversations. Real time, self-directed feedback is the best way to improve performance. Are we giving the people all the right tools and resources they need? And sometimes that's where standard operating procedures and documentation can fit in there. Those are resources. Are we setting the right incentives and consequences for the behavior that we want? And do we have a culture and the values that will influence the behaviors that we want? Those are the corporate ones. On a individual side, do they have the skills and the knowledge to do the job? That's where training comes in. But we also tend to, most training is very heavily slanted towards knowledge. People just need to know this stuff. And the reality is, to improve performance, people need to be able to do something. They need to be able to produce something. So when we do training as a solution, we focus it on what needs to be produced, and we help give them practice in doing those things. No page turner, knowledge dump with a quiz at the end that says, can you repeat to me what I just told you 10 minutes ago?
Interesting, because I've had conversations with my leadership team, and told them, training doesn't mean they comprehend it. That means you've told them something.
Right. It's skills practice that matters. Mm-hmm. Other things it's have you selected the right person? And this is where assessments and personality tests in EOS world is, you have the right person in the right seat. Do they have the capacity to do the job? Those kinds of things. Then we look at individuals' motives and preferences. These are the behavior influences as to what gets people to do their job. And then the part where we're really humanizing it is we look at what is their mindset and how are they at their relationships, because so much of performance is based on how you handle relationships.
Tell me about that.
So if you can't communicate well with your coworkers, if you can't communicate well with your supervisors or your customers, it's going to impact performance. And, we've tended to dismiss a lot of those soft skills as soft and not really all that important. But relationships also goes beyond, have you taken a course in communicating? Do you understand different people's personality profiles and things like that? It's how do you actually interact with other people in a way that's effective? And what we look for when there's a performance problem is, are those relationships causing the performance problem? Because the go-to thing is, they'll call us up. We need you to develop training for our people on this process. And the process is fine and people know how to do it, but they aren't doing it because they're reacting to a poor relationship. It's like when you tell your kid, clean your room, and they don't do it because they don't like being told to go do it, kind of a thing.
So I guess the method of going into the kids' room with the trash bag when they haven't cleaned it in 3 weeks wouldn't work in the workplace.
Well, it might, because that's under the consequences and incentives.
Okay.
So, and that it is important to have consequences and incentives, but it only really works if you haven't told them that you're going to do that. If you haven't said, if this room isn't clean by 5 p.m., I'm going to go in with a trash bag, then the consequences are meaningless because they're random. Most of the times when consequences and incentives don't work, it's because the employee doesn't understand or know what they are. And sometimes the boss doesn't either. Yeah.
We kind of call those tough tough conversations here, whereas, you may have an issue, the expectations are not aligned. And so you talk about, hey, well, this is what I was expecting, and I was expecting it by then. And now I'm going to extend that deadline and I need it by now. And if not, this is what potentially could happen. You could be pulled off the account or whatever the case may be,
Right. That ties back into the setting expectations. Mm-hmm. And again, ideally, if you can have a feedback system in place where it doesn't have to involve you as their manager, where they can get their feedback, am I doing the job? Am I succeeding at doing the job? And they can tell for themselves. Then there's no surprise when you as their manager comes and says, last week you only hit your target 3 times out of 5. That's not acceptable.
So how do you go about working with your clients to, determine, those expectations, the outcomes, the consequences, and the incentives? Because we didn't talk much about the incentives.
So we start by developing what we call a role overview for a particular position. And it really looks at what are the business results. When I hire somebody, I am hiring them to produce a result for me.
And this is different from the job description, right?
It is different from the job description. Most job descriptions are people descriptions, and they don't actually describe the job. So which really contributes a lot to when you hire somebody and they seemed great, they interviewed well, we liked them, they checked all the boxes on the people description, but then they get in there and there's this mystification of what is expected of them for the results of the job. What specifically means you've done a good job, you haven't done a good job, you've succeeded or not. And part of this is to really get rid of that mutual mystification that happens between employers and employees. So we start with looking at the role overview. What are the business results that you are requiring out of this position? And then we go into some of the things that are typical of job descriptions. What skills do people need to have? But we really dig in deep because a lot of times we put in required education, required experience, but we really challenge business owners. Is that a requirement to do this job? Can they get this task done? Can they produce the result if they don't have that? And if the answer is yes, they can, or some people can, it's not an actual requirement. Mm. Dig in really, really deep on that. But then the very next part, and this is the really critical part, is we define the outputs of that job. Outputs are nouns, so they are the things. You have to create a report. Sales. You close X dollars in sales. What are the outputs of the job? So very, very clear. And with those outputs, we are very clear on what means done, what is good, what is bad. So like in my company, we have instructional designers. And one of the outputs of an instructional designer is a design document. And so the quality is it has to be fully complete. It has to be complete by the deadline. It is complete within the number of hours, the scope of the project. It meets all of the QA or quality assurance checklist items. And so that's what defines a good output. So every role, you could dig into the weeds and get into lots of outputs that you produce in a role. We want to look at the 5 most important ones, 5 or 6 most important ones, or the ones that are causing you problems. If we're going in as a diagnostic, as you have a performance problem, then let's look at the specific thing that's causing the problem. And we dig in that and we look at all of those. So now you have a profile of the person, of not the person, I'm sorry. You have a profile of the role and what you expect as a business owner. I am paying you this amount of money to get me these results. And it's very, very clear. You can now use that in your hiring. When you're hiring somebody, share those documents with them.
Mm-hmm.
And now, well, boy, I don't really want to do that. So now I'm going to self-select out of this hiring process.
Which saves a whole lot of time on the employer side.
Absolutely. You use it in all of your coaching, your leadership. When you're managing somebody, you've got very clear black and white. These are the things I've expected of you. These are the things you have agreed that you can produce. And now you can start looking when it's not happening. What of those things I mentioned earlier, where did it fall through? Are you unable to do it because you don't have that skill? You might then need some training or some practice or some coaching around developing that skill. Is it because you need a certain software tool that I haven't provided you, and that's why you're not getting it? Or is it that you didn't understand that you weren't getting it because you weren't getting feedback often enough? Are we in a culture of CYA and not get things done? So do you have a performance culture as part of your organization where people do what they say they're going to do? Or, so that's where the relationships of all the people around you, you've got to take all of those things into consideration because, and again, this is where the go-to answer is often training. But if they can do it right some of the time, it's not a knowledge problem. They know how to do it right. So looking at all these other influences on behavior is what you have to look at to find out why aren't they doing it.
So is that what you mean by humanizing the experience?
Humanizing, because people do work and people have lots of, we like to sometimes give blanket answers of we're going to solve a problem because this one thing happened and now we're going to change everything to fix that problem. And how often does that actually fix the problem? And how many other problems does it cause in the meantime?
So my leadership team and I, we do leadership development meetings, and we do them individually with the person and me plus as a group. And I think I've had probably 5 of these conversations today already that you are talking about. That's why you see me grinning over here. It's like, yep, I know what you're talking about. So sorry, that just was kind of what I was thinking. So it sounds a lot like is development and training, but not just the technical tools to do that, but development and training on both the leader side as well as some culture.
Very much. What we like to say is that we are all about building a performance culture in your organization. Yeah, so there is so much of it is the culture of what are people used to, what are to being held accountable. And I don't believe anybody can hold anybody else accountable. What you can do is build a culture and a system where people can hold themselves accountable. And then if you're not doing your job that you and I have sat down and we've very clearly said, this is what the job is. We both agree that this is what the job is. There's no mystification of what success looks like. And you choose not to do that. And now we've met and tried to say, okay, what happens? Maybe it's not that you chose not to do it. Maybe you can't do it because of some other influence, whatever. We try to remove those roadblocks. But if it comes down to the point where you have repeatedly not met expectations, then what we say that both nobody is surprised if the relationship is terminated. because you are both already been agreeing it's not working. This person, for whatever reason, and it's not that they're a bad person, it's just this job wasn't as good of a fit as you thought it was. You thought you were going to be really good at making cold calls in a sales job, and you hate it so much you avoid it. That's motives and preferences part. And that you are never going to make it because you hate that part of your job. Then we're going to say, maybe it's time that we find another seat for you, and that seat may or may not be in my organization.
So shifting ever so slightly, let's just kind of role play. I come to you and I say, Angie, I need training for my team. As a business owner, what are some of the questions you're going to ask me?
So I would start with, tell me why you think you need training.
Okay.
What are your employees doing, and what are they supposed to be doing? Why are they not doing it? Do they do it right sometimes?
Okay.
If they do it right sometimes, why don't they do it right? What's going on that they don't do it right all of the time? Now, let's say we go down these and we do some evaluation, we ask some questions, and we say, yes, they probably could use some training. Then we're going to look at, what do they need to keep in their immediate recall memory? That's the knowledge part that you have to train on. Stuff they have to know on the top of their heads. We can train on knowledge for that. But for the rest of it, what performance support tools, job aids, process documentation, things like that, can we give them that will help them do it better, get to the information they need quicker, and that kind of thing. And then let's give them training on how to use those resources that we've given them and let them practice using it in a safe environment.
I love that. Where do you see that business owners are struggling the most to get this implemented?
One, I think it's really takes some looking in a mirror. It's easy to say my problems are my employees. My employees are lazy. My employees, I tell them over and over and over again to do this, and they just won't do it. And it's easier to say it's bad employee, lazy employee, untrained, or the employee needs training. It's much harder to look at yourself and say, am I giving them the tools they need to do the job? Am I providing appropriate feedback in a way that they can accept it? Those are hard. They're cheaper, they're a heck of a lot cheaper than developing training. But they're hard because it involves personal change. Mm-hmm. And this is a process. It is a process that you do one position at a time, one problem at a time. And when you fix it once, companies do this, they want it everywhere in the organization because they see how much it actually works.
We are literally working on the exact same thing. We just finished reading the book Who in our leadership group, and they call it outcomes. And so we're working on the first position now and working on the outcomes for that, creating the scorecard for the interview process. But I liked what you said about make sure you're sharing it across the organization also, because this would be new to the existing team members since we plan on implementing it and hiring. But this is, as the business has changed, really what we need in the organization right now.
Yeah. One of the things, once you've done these output sheets that we work on, you also now set up a situation where you can cross-train people. You can develop a career path. So people who are starting at this level, they can see what all the other jobs are and what skills and knowledge they need to get there. And so it really helps with retention. We're in a world right now where, millennials and Gen Z tend to stay in their jobs 3 years or less.
Yes.
And that's very painful for organizations to be able to replace them, to get new people up to speed quicker, to just be able to keep your organization running with these kinds of tools that you've made it very, very clear, open and wide to the organization. Those millennials will stay if they see a career path for them. If they say, hey, I can get what I need and what I want to learn and develop the skills for my next, because they're thinking 3 jobs ahead.
Mm-hmm.
And these tools will help you retain and cross-train all of your people.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So what should I have asked you that I didn't ask you today?
Well, we covered most of what I had jotted down of things I wanted to get out.
Awesome.
One of the things, this field of human performance was really developed in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And most of the intellectual property in this field has not been updated since then. And that's, I think, part of what our mission really is to bring this, modernize it, and make it more accessible to more people.
Great mission. Absolutely. How can our listeners find you after the show?
Well, we have a website. If you really want to get just more information on all of this kind of stuff, improvingperformanceatwork.com.
Okay.
That is not a sales website at all. It's just lots of free stuff we put out there because we are so passionate about human performance. Otherwise, you can reach out to me, Dianetti at radcomservices.com, and I'll set up a conversation.
Perfect. And we'll make sure that both that URL as well as your email is in our show notes. Angie, thank you so much for being with me today.
Oh, this was so much fun. I can talk about this stuff forever.
Thank you for joining me for today's Nurture Small Business podcast, where the focus is on business growth through technology, leadership, and people strategies. Do you have an idea for a podcast or feedback you'd like to share with me? Send me a note through my website at dcavirtual.com/contact.